Luminar Neo has some amazing tools inside of it where we can take a photo from looking like this to this in a matter of minutes. So today we're going to go ahead and dive in and do that. Now, as always, if you would like to follow along with today's tutorial, go ahead and jump into the description box and download these files or this file, and we'll go ahead and get started. So first things first, let me just minimize everything over here so it's a little bit easier to follow along. We're going to come over to Essentials, and you'll notice I have Develop Raw available to me, and that's because this is a raw image. So we'll go ahead and open this up. Now, where I like to start with these types of photos, especially dull gray looking photos, is the camera profile, because I want to bring back some of the life that is probably in the image on the day. So let's go ahead and click the camera profile here. We'll scroll down, and I think I went with Camera Vivid on the initial one, but you could go with any of these, and I think that you would be perfectly fine. The idea here is I want something that's going to be very, very saturated in the end, because I want to breathe the color back into the image. So I'm going to go with Camera Vivid, but if you wanted to, again, you can go with any of these others. So I'll go ahead and click that, and we'll just take a look at a before and after. And you can see it's already bringing back some of those colors, but the overall image is still a little dark. So let's minimize the camera profile and jump into the light section. Now I'm going to go ahead and expose this just a little bit. A little does go a long way with images, and you do have to pay attention to your particular photo, but for this one, a little does go a long way. Now, what I'm seeing is there's not much separation between the darkest areas to the brightest areas, and that's where smart contrast really comes in handy. So I'm just going to boost a little bit of the contrast in the image, and it's going to darken down some of these areas, but it's also going to brighten up some of the other areas. So we get some tonal separation in the image, and that's actually pretty important to me. And then last thing that I'll do over here in the develop section, for light at least, is I'm going to increase the shadows, and that's just going to help with that foreground rock face that's over on the left side of the image. You'll see that that starts to pop out a little bit more, and so we went from something that was looking pretty flat to something that is a little bit more dimension, but we can still continue working this. So I'm going to minimize the light section, and we'll jump down to the black and whites. And what I want to do is make sure that I have a good black point. So I do have a good black point, and I'm pretty sure I got a good white point. So we'll just bring back some of those whites in the sky by pulling the whites down. And I don't need to do a whole lot of this because I'm not printing it, but I did want to pull some of that back because that's going to help with the overall look. Now, I'm not going to worry about curves for this particular image, but I am going to come into color. And the whole reason I want to come into color is because I feel like this photo is still a little dull. It's come a long way from here to here, but what I want to do is increase the vibrance. And what that does is it intelligently and smoothly increases the saturation, especially in areas that weren't really saturated to begin with. So around 36 looks good to me, and honestly, this has revived the image overall, and this is the beauty of shooting in RAW, because this is a very gray image, which is what came straight out of the camera, and this is what we were able to create, changing the camera profile and increasing the vibrance. Now, of course, the saturation slider is a great slider to play with. You got to be careful with it. You don't want to like overdo it, because you can go too far. And if that's the look that you're going for, then by all means. But I feel like that's a little too much, and it's not really targeted. So I like to be very gentle with my saturation slider. Now, the next aspect that I want to work with on this image is the white balance, because that is the way of interpreting colors in a raw image. So right now with the ash shot at 5618, it's a very blue image, and I think this image could stand to be just a tad bit more warm. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pull this over to the right and warm it up. Now, there's two ways of using white balance in photo editing. There's the corrective way of something didn't quite look right, so I need to adjust the white balance. And then the way that I typically use white balance is in a creative way. Modern cameras are pretty good at establishing the white balance out of camera, especially if you select one of those presets that are in the camera. But when you get into the editing workspace, assuming you're not trying to create a photorealistic or represent the day, entirely, then you can get a little bit more creative with the white balance. And this plays a huge part in the later color manipulation. So always pay attention to what you want to do with your white balance. Most of the time you can leave it as is, but for today, I wanted to increase the warmth. Actually, I ended up going down because there is that blue overcast. So let's go ahead and take a look at the before and the after. So I like where we are right now, and I'm just going to go ahead and click on develop to close that down. And then the next step is structure AI. And the reason I like to apply structure right after my develop raw is because it's still working with a little bit of the tonal arrangements, and I do need to work with my light, and then I like to work with my color, and then I add in special effects. So right now, I feel like the structure AI, it does play a big part in the overall tonal adjustments as well, and that's why I add that right after my develop raw. So if I hold down the little eye here, you can see the impacts that it is having on the image, but I don't necessarily need it in the sky. So I'm going to come over to masking, and then I'm going to grab a linear gradient, and I'm just going to drag this up to maybe around here. I think that that's going to be just fine because that's going to apply it all the way down here at the bottom, and then it starts to kind of taper off as it gets closer to the sky. Maybe I'll pull it up a little bit more, somewhere around there. And now I can just come back to my adjustment, and if I hit the before and after, you can see how it's just applying down here and not going into the sky, which I'm okay with. So I'll close that down, and it is time to start working with color. In my opinion, this is where I think that color fits into the workflow. You let me know what your thoughts are on that in the comment section below. Now, I'm going to click on color, and I'm going to skip over saturation and vibrance here because I've already done a good portion of that using the develop raw. So instead, I'm going to click on HSL, and we'll just scroll down to get some more real estate here. And I'm going to start with hue. And what hue does is it starts to shift colors in one direction or the other. And this is where you really get to control the overall color space in your image. So I know that this image has some greens, which probably also has yellows because it's foliage. It also has some oranges, and there's some browns going through here, probably some yellows in these little bright areas here. But then a majority of the image is blue. And so what I want to do is make a blue heavy favored image, but pulling out some of those details with the orange and the yellow in the rock face here. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm first going to establish how blue I want my image. So I'm going to come down here to the cyans, and I'm going to push the cyan towards blue. And I'm also going to push the blue towards cyan. And you can see how that's starting to shape the look up here at the top, but maybe I want a more purplish blue. Let's see. And we'll push the purples more towards blue. And this is a balancing act. There's no right or wrong, just what you want it to do. So if I go before and after, it's not really doing much of anything. And so I'm going to jump into saturation, and I'm just going to increase the blues, and you can see how that kind of punches through. I'm also going to increase the cyans so that way it really does shine through. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see how I'm starting to get more of a blue profile in this upper portion of the image, which looks pretty good to me right there. So now I'm going to jump back over to hue, and I want to start working with the oranges and the reds in this rock face. So I'm going to go ahead and shift the oranges maybe more into the orange red range, and then move reds also more into the orange range. And let's see about moving yellows over. Okay. And so now to make that really start to stand out, I'm going to work with the saturation. And so I'm going to grab the orange and saturate that just a bit more. And so you can see that's starting to come out in that rock face. Also saturate the reds, and I'm going to desaturate the yellows just so that way it's not like crazy in your face, because again, this is all about a balancing act. All right. And let's jump back over here to hue. And I don't think I really need to work with anything else now that I think about it. So now it's time to work with the luminance or the brightness values of all of these colors in the image. And so for me, what I'm seeing in the blues, it's more dark with the exception of this light beam, and we can definitely work with that independently. So what I'm going to try to do is bring the blues and the cyans, pull that down into a darker color space like so. And that does lose a lot of the light in the image, so we're going to have to recover that later. But for me, what I think it's doing is it's helping make the contrast in the overall color here. And so then what that allows me to do is to pop the oranges here by pushing up on the luminance of the reds as well as the luminance of the orange. And you can see how that's just starting to come out of the rock face there. And then I can even increase the yellows and the greens. And so we'll pull down on the cyans a little bit further, and the purples. So the major feature is darker, which I think is okay because we're going to have at the end a more blue overcast. So I want to make sure that I'm highlighting the rock face here as best as I can. So let's take a look at the colors before and after, before and after. And then what I can do is just grab the vibrance here and we can push that up. And this is just going to add in some color over the entire image, just so that way we're not losing that color palette that we were creating in the develop raw, as well as what we were just creating here in the color section. So here's the before and here's the after, and I like what I got there, so I'm just going to close that out just so we can figure out where we came from. Here is the initial image, and here is where we've gotten so far. Now, if you're finding value, go ahead and smash that like button and consider subscribing. So now that we have the color kind of in the direction and in the way that we want, it's time to start dodging and burning, because I think I want to start directing the viewer's eye into particular areas. So what I'm going to do is grab the develop tool here, and I'm going to click on the light, and I'm just going to pull down on the exposure to about there. I think that looks good. We'll click on masking, grab a linear gradient, and then I'm just going to click and drag this in from the bottom here. And I think that that's going to be pretty good. Yeah, that's going to be good. Just darkening down this area here. And then I'm going to do another linear gradient to come over there. So let's click off of that develop, open another one, and pull down on the exposure to about there. Let's go masking. And then actually, I'm going to go with a radial gradient. And I'm just going to put this radial gradient, make it more of an oval. I'm going to put it right over here. And the beauty of the radial gradient is it allows you to get into areas and just kind of contain the adjustment. You do have to play around with it to get it right where you want it. Maybe make it a little bit skinnier and work on the feather. Yeah, something like that. And maybe even pull this out. And I can always come back and manipulate this a little bit further. The radial gradients inside of Luminar Neo are a little finicky sometimes to get exactly where you want them. So we'll just go ahead and come back out of that, and let's play around with the exposure. Yeah, darkening that down just a little bit further. You can see we're starting to shape the light in this image, and that's ultimately what I want to do. So we'll go ahead and close out that development section, and then I'm going to darken down this middle area just a little bit here as well. So we'll grab develop, and then we'll go with exposure again. And this time I'm going to come back to masking. I'm going to grab a radial gradient and then just pull this out and put it into this little area right down here. Again, I'm not going to finesse this too much because I don't want the tutorial to be like crazy long. So we'll do something like that, and I think that that'll work out for us. So we'll come back and hit adjustment, and let's just see how dark we make that area. And we may have to come back and tweak that a little bit later. The beauty of this is it's all non-destructive, so we can do exactly that. Now that we've gotten all of the burning sections or the darkening things going on in the image, it's time to work with the dodging or the brightening portion. And so I'm just going to go ahead and close out that develop, open up another one, and this time I'm going to increase the exposure. All right. And what I like to do with my brightening effects is figure out where I want to paint this in. And so I'm actually going to use a brush for my dodging effects as opposed to using one of the masking tools. So we'll come over to masking, grab the brush, and we're already on paint. So as I move around here, let me just make my brush size a little bit larger. And then I'm going to come over here to where it says softness. I like the softness at 100, but the strength, I like to pull this down. And essentially this is like the flow, but it's how strong the initial adjustment is when you paint it on. And so what I'm doing is I'm just going to paint in this brightening effect in areas where I want the adjustment to go. And you can see as I go over the area with multiple passes, it gets a little bit more dense. Like this area is a lot more red than this area. And you can see the brightening effect is more impactful in that area. And so I literally just go around the entire image and I paint in the brightening adjustment where I want it. And this is just for my first pass of dodging when I work inside of Luminar Neo, because this is my technique. And yes, I am doing this with a mouse. And so we'll come over these clouds, maybe in here. And so if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see it's very subtle. And that's the way that I like to work, is as subtle as I can. So that way I can build it up. And this is looking pretty good. I think I can come a little bit more aggressively through here. And so we'll do that. And then maybe even hit this little area right down here, just for a little bit of interest in the overall photo. And maybe hit this area up because we got people on this rock face. We might as well be able to see that we got people there. So turning this off and turning it back on, you can see kind of what's happening with that lightning effect. And again, it's subtle, but it does make a huge difference. And so I'm just going to increase the exposure a little bit more so that way it pops a little bit better. All right. And so that's literally how I do my dodging and burning, good, bad, indifferent. You let me know what your thoughts are about that in the comment section. Now, I'm done with all of the color adjustments as well as all of the tonal adjustments, and those are the basics. So here's the before and here's the after. And this could be all that you ever want to do to your image. But for me, I like to go a little bit further with my images. And so this is where we jump into the creative section. And the first thing that I want to add is a mystical filter. And so with the mystical filter, what it does is it kind of softens everything. And I like the way that it makes the image look. I don't quite have a name for it, but I just love how it looks. So if I turn it off and then turn it back on, you can see like all of those rough edges kind of go away, and it makes this image look, in my opinion, much more appealing. Now, you can play around with the shadows and the softness, and so if I want to open up those shadowed areas, then I can pull up on the shadows. But if I do that, then I feel like I need a higher amount of the mystical filter, and then that starts to just overdo it. So I'm going to back that off, and I'm also going to back off my shadows because I want the light where it is. I just spent all that time dodging and burning, so it doesn't make sense for me to play around with the shadows getting opened. But I am going to cool down the image using the colorize section. And that's just because we still have those blue tones, and I want those to be kind of the keynote, if you will, in the image. And so if I turn off the mystical filter and turn it back on, you can see what it's doing to the overall image. And it's just, in my opinion, helping to make it look a little bit more cohesive overall. Let's go ahead and take a look at the before and the after. And I think that this looks really, really good. I am going to try one more thing because that's just the way that I like to work. So we'll come back to essentials. I'm going to grab a develop, and I'm just going to crank the exposure all the way down. And then I'm going to go masking, and I am going to add in a radial adjustment. And I will put this radial adjustment right here, kind of large, or a rather large radial adjustment. And let me see if I can stretch that out even further. There we go. Something like that, and maybe even widen it. Yeah. Okay. And then I'm going to invert this so that way only the outside of my radial adjustment gets the effect of that heavy darkening. And it's kind of like a vignette. And I actually like that. So let's come back to the adjustments, and I'll just push up on the exposure so it's not like crazy. But I kind of like that. So here's a before and an after, and it really just puts the focus on the people. I know I did all this work to brighten up these areas down here. And so maybe I wouldn't do that, but you let me know what your thoughts are on that in the comment section. Would you darken the rest of the image and only brighten where the light is coming through? Or would you turn that off and just kind of have information all over? That's the beauty of editing images and kind of the philosophy and artistic process that everyone has to go through and figure out. So you let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you want to pick up Luminar Neo, they are having a huge sale. You can save some money using the coupon code in the description box below. It is an affiliate coupon. That means I make a small commission from everyone who uses it, but it's at no extra charge to you. It's a win-win because you save money and help the channel at the same time. If you got questions about the software, let me know. And until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.